Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for coming to our writing workshop today. We're really pleased to have MJ Curry here from the University of Rochester. She spearheads their writing program at the Warner School of Graduate Education. And you know, she wrote the book in front of you along with some of her students.
6 students, yes.
Yeah, so I'm going to just let her get right into it, but we thank her so much for coming today. So,
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you very much for inviting me to be here. I've been at the Warner School. This is my 20th year, so I've been there. It feels like a lifetime, not quite. And writing is what I research and I teach a lot about, particularly in terms of writing in social science fields, but a lot of what I'm going to talk today applies across all disciplines. So I will be asking you during this workshop to do some writing. Don't panic. You won't have to show it to anybody. And I will even at one point ask you to kind of map it out, so even if you have a piece of scrap paper, which I know these days that's probably a risky thing to assume, or some kind of device to work on. So first I want to get started with just talking about what writing includes, because a lot of times people reserve the term writing for just a specific stage of it. And in reality, in a sense, our brains, once we start thinking about a writing project, we're always writing. And in the process of doing your research, you're writing. So you're reading, and as you read, you're thinking about what you're reading, what it means for your own work. You're ideally taking notes on your reading, thinking and making notes, analyzing data and writing about it. All of these things typically involve some kind of writing, but often we don't count that writing. We only count the writing that's kind of toward the end of the process. A major part of academic writing in graduate school involves crafting arguments. So crafting arguments is another way of saying making a claim for what I believe is true and then supporting it with reasons and evidence. Other aspects of writing involve thinking about how what you're writing actually contributes to the knowledge base. So graduate school is a big moment of shifting from being a student and mainly being asked to kind of regurgitate or give ideas back to a professor for evaluation to shifting into becoming an expert in your area, having something to say to people that's not just what they said to you or what you were reading. Writing involves revising, and then proofreading. And one of the, again, major shifts between undergraduate and graduate school is that as you become, the longer you're in graduate school, the more you realize that professional academic writers, professors, researchers, et cetera, to us, writing really is revising. The actual putting words on the screen or the page for the first time, which is what some people think of as writing, is just a very first step. And it's writing, including in response to feedback from other people, who could be a lot of different kinds of other people. And then our most favorite part is checking references or citations and putting them in the right format, or learning how to use a referencing program that will help you do that. Does anybody have any thoughts on any other activities that might not have been included in this list? What writing might also encompass? Seems to cover it. Okay. So putting that as our kind of larger frame, what I'm mostly going to talk to you about and have you do some work on and get your thoughts on today are really what the title is, tips and tools. So what are some strategies that you can incorporate into your work practices as a graduate student that may make it easier to integrate the writing that you need to do, may make you feel more comfortable doing it, and may actually give you some pleasure, because there is actually pleasure to be had in writing this kind of stuff. A lot of people, including many students, talk about writer's block. Some people actually challenge that writer's block is a thing. I think if you're experiencing writer's block, you think those people are probably crazy. So thinking about what is writer's block, it's basically a form of anxiety that prevents us, often physically prevents us from sitting down on I'm assuming these days everybody's writing on the computer. If you're writing on paper or stone tablets or some other thing, good for you, but eventually you'll probably need to put it on the computer, so that's what I'm going to use. And often that kind of anxiety that leads to writer's block is a fear of being assessed or evaluated. It's a fear of what other people are going to think. So a big step in overcoming writer's block is to stop seeing it as this kind of thing that we do at the end of all of our research processes that has to be perfect. Probably no professional academic writer who's published, and I'm currently working on my 8th book, I can tell you there's no text that I've published that I ever thought was perfect and done. I'm sure there's mistakes in there. I'm sure there's things in that book that we wish we had done differently. There's things that we could add. There's always things that can be changed. So if you think about, this balance between having a text be as good as possible, but also recognizing there's no such thing as perfection. So some habits to get into in terms of preventing or overcoming anxiety and writer's block include writing as much as possible. So this sounds perhaps counterintuitive. If this thing is stressing you out and you may not like it, why would you want to do more of it? It's a practice. It's like going to the gym. It's like playing piano scales. It's doing any kind of practice that you want to get better at. The more you do it, the faster and better you're going to get. Okay? And the kind of writing that you do on a regular, ideally daily basis doesn't have to be the formal writing that you're going to be giving to somebody else to evaluate. Another really useful strategy is to do as much planning as before you start working on it, to spend a lot of time planning it. And that can mean a lot of different things. Some of it is figuring out what are all the different tasks that are involved in a particular text. So if you're writing a paper that involves library research, then you will need to spend some time doing that library research. That's part of your writing process. If you have data that you're writing about, some people consider the data analysis itself part of the writing process because you're always inscribing in some way, or a machine is inscribing it for you. So there's usually a number of tasks involved in writing. Then we get into things like, and I'm going to talk about this in a minute, free writing, outlining, drafting. If you've got a big text due at a particular time, it's really useful, and you probably know this from sort of mapping out your work across the semester or the academic year anyhow, to work backwards. To start with the deadline, think about the different stages of writing, think about how much time you might need to do each of those stages, which is often very hard to estimate, but the earlier you start on a project, the less anxiety you're likely to have about it. It also gives you an opportunity to ask questions about it. It gives you an opportunity to have peer reviewers or writing consultants or other people help you. One of the big shifts that many people make between undergraduate and graduate school is the amount of writing that you have to do, the type of writing that you have to do, and the standards that you're expected to meet. In a minute, I'm going to talk about what free writing is for people who don't know, but this is a very low-stress approach to doing any kind of writing, and this is a good thing if you want to get into a daily writing practice. A daily writing practice could be 15 minutes. It doesn't have to be hours and hours, and that's another fallacy that a lot of people have, is that they can only write something if they have a whole day, if they have a weekend, or whatever. Most productive academic writers write every day, 15 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour, whatever it is. Revising, as I mentioned, is a major part of that. One strategy for revising, if you've drafted a text and you feel like it's all over the place and you don't know what to do with it, is to create what's called a back outline. And in a back outline, and it's in the book under outline, you look at your text and you make a list on a separate piece of paper of every idea that you come to. Every sentence, if it has a new idea, you write that down. Every paragraph, it could be within one sentence, you could have 3 ideas. So the back outline allows you to just extract the ideas, and then you can see, do these actually go together? Oh, I already talked about this here, I don't need to talk about it here. Christine's nodding like she's very familiar with this strategy. Okay, good. By the way, if you have questions during this talk, during this workshop, feel free to raise your hand, and or if anybody online does. Because we're going pretty fast here. Okay. Some of this is common sense. If you want to get your writing done, in 15, 30, 60 minutes a day. Are you saying the same thing?
I
Okay.
just want to make sure.
You want to try to avoid distractions during that time. So people play all kinds of games with ourselves. Some people will leave their phone in another room. Some people, Christine and I were talking about this before the workshop started, but I've been for, I don't know, at least 10 years, part of a faculty graduate student writing group that meets at a cafe on Friday mornings. We don't leave our phones at home, but the fact that we're all there together helps us to block off the time. It helps us to focus on what we're there to do. And there is this sort of implicit assumption that you're there to write. You're not there to grade papers or do emails. Of course, nobody's monitoring that. One strategy a lot of writers use, not only academic writers, is called the Pomodoro method. Has anybody heard of this before? Anybody want to say what it is? Go ahead.
So the Pomodoro method is basically you do a task, or in this case it's writing, for about 30 minutes, 25 or 30 minutes, just focusing on that task, and then you get a 5 minutes break.
Yeah.
And then after the 5 minutes break, you do another 30 minutes of working, and then another 5 minutes of break. And then you just repeat that process.
Exactly. And Pomodoro is Italian for tomato. And the reason it's called Pomodoro method is the old-fashioned, one type of old-fashioned kitchen timer are round timers that look like tomatoes. They're shaped like tomatoes. And so the idea is you're setting the timer for 25 minutes. I know a lot of people who are thrilled if they can do 1 Pomodoro a day. So it's just a kind of clever way of talking about, getting a chunk of writing done. And when we say writing, again, it can be anything. It could be free writing, it could be outlining. It's probably, even though reading is part of writing, there are many people who get stuck at the reading stage because you can never know enough. But as a graduate student or as an academic or a researcher, you can never know enough. So at a certain point, you have to stop reading and start writing. But the other important aspect of the Pomodoro method is that it does include that break. And I think, again, sometimes when we feel like, this is my writing time, I have to use every minute to the fullest, it's just not biologically feasible. Our brains need a break, our bodies need a break. So whether you take that 5 minutes that's built in or you take 10 minutes, that's up to you. So the next thing I'm going to ask you to do is some free writing. How many people here have experienced free writing before? Anybody? 2 people? I love it. Okay. 3 people. Great. Okay. So what's great about free writing is a lot of things. One is that you basically write whatever comes to your mind, and the other is that you don't have to show it to anybody. So including, you don't have to look at it again in your lifetime if you don't want to, but a lot of people find it useful. So free writing is a limited time activity. I often use it in my teaching. I'll have students free write for 5 minutes or whatever, just to capture what's going on in the brain. It's also really helpful if you know you need to work on a text, but you're kind of dreading it, or you're having, I've had collaborations that were challenging to participate in, but I knew I needed to do my work on it, and so I would just free write about my emotional state, and then that would get me into the academic writing. It's also just a good way to get words down without worrying about them, because in my experience teaching in a graduate school for 20 years, a lot of graduate students err on the side of perfectionism. There's, if you got this far in your academic life, it's because you're good. And a lot of times, we're good at things like all of the required things, handing in our assignments on time, doing all the homework, et cetera. And that kind of personality that many of us have can make it hard to feel that a piece is good enough or to let go of a piece. So this approach is meant to sort of leave all that stuff out. While you're free writing, you want to keep your hand moving. And this is probably the most unusual thing about free writing, is that even if you can't think of what to write, you just keep writing something. Like, I'm stuck, can't think of anything to write. I've told students, you can write, I hate this, I hate this, I hate this. I don't care what you write, because I'm not going to see it anyhow. You can write in any language. You can write in a mixture of languages. It really doesn't matter. And then you don't go back and fix anything. So all of that revising, correcting, all of that just invites the editor in to tell us that we're not good enough. Any questions about free writing? Okay, what I'm going to do is ask you, oops, oh, hold on, I went too far. There we go. Okay, I'm going to tell you this one other tool before we get into the free writing. Another similar tool is called quick writing. And it's just kind of mini free writing, and it also might be making a list or making it some kind of graphic instead of actually putting words next to each other. So what I want you to do is, for 2 minutes, I'm going to put the timer on my phone. I just want you to answer this question: what does the term writing mean to you? What does it include? I have to get my phone ready. Okay, so go ahead. You have 2 minutes to answer that question. I know, it's fun. Okay, finish your sentence or your thought. How did that feel? Anybody want to share? Please.
I thought it was, I guess because this is like not for a class or anything, it felt fine.
Mm-hmm.
But I was imagining if I was to sit down and try to do this like for a lab report or something, I would be a lot more stressed.
Interesting.
I'm going to just paraphrase for the
Yeah.
people on Zoom, that it felt fine because it was low pressure writing. It wasn't for a class or anything. But if it was for a class, that it might change how it feels for you.
And thank you for that, because that is actually illuminates really well how our emotions shift around writing a lot. And so one task that might feel perfectly comfortable might be different in a different context. So one of my goals today is to help you think about what would happen if you tried this thing in that higher stress situation. Okay, so without asking you to share what you wrote, I just want you to turn to a neighbor, just whoever you're sitting next to in twos or threes, and just share some of the key points that you wrote about what writing includes in your mind. What's your own definition? And we'll just do this for 4 minutes.
Because I didn't write.
Yeah. Of course, I didn't set the 4 minutes, but that's okay. All right, let's come back together. That wasn't really 4 minutes because I forgot to set my timer, but I'm happy to hear some discussion happening. Does any group want to share anything about what you talked about? This is how to get silence in a large group. Anybody want to share? All right, we will keep going. All right, as I mentioned in the intro, another major tool is planning. I think I actually covered this earlier, but making the to-do list is actually an important way that you can mesh that technique, that approach with mapping out your time. So if you just put on your calendar, you know, I'm going to spend this 2 hours working on this particular text, and if you use your calendar, you know, you may well sit down there, but you might spend the first 15 or 20 minutes planning out what you're going to do or figuring out what you're going to do. One of the reasons it's so powerful to be engaged in writing as a daily or frequent practice is that it helps our brains remember what we were doing. Some writers, I mean, I've heard this, I don't know if this is true, fiction writers like Ernest Hemingway would actually stop writing in the middle of a sentence so that when he came back to it, his brain would kind of jump right back into what he was thinking. I mean, I don't think I've done that, but what I have sometimes done when I'm writing and I have to stop for whatever reason is just write a note to myself in brackets. The next thing I wanted to say here was X. So that's, in a sense, a kind of embedded planning technique. But what can be really useful for planning on your calendar is, you know, today I'm going to work on these references. Tuesday I'm going to do this, you know, so that when you get there, you basically know what you're going to do already. The other nice thing about making lists to put onto your calendar is that you can feel good when you check off the to-do list. So I'm a big fan of to-do lists. This takes us into scheduling and goal setting. There's an organization, I don't know if RIT is part of it, but the U of R finally joined it after many of us were lobbying for it, called the National Center for Faculty Development and Diversity. Do you know, Christine, if you're part?
We are a member of that, yeah.
So what we have at the U of R now is that faculty and students can participate, and this organization they just did a 2-week writing challenge. So, you know, even though I have supposedly a lot of time to write, it's still good for me to have like some kind of accountability. So you just had to say you were going to write 30 minutes a day, and then you logged on and you said what your goals were, and then they actually had a timer you could set. So it was pretty fancy. But what was good about it was just knowing that there was this thing out there asking me if I had done my writing for the day was actually very powerful. Even though I already have, I'm on the book I'm working on now, I already have an hour a day on my calendar, but it's different when somebody is asking you to account for it. One of their general recommendations in terms of organizing your work, controlling anxiety and stress, is to spend 30 minutes on a Sunday looking at your week, figuring out when are you going to write, when are you going to get stuff done. And they talk about scheduling writing as if it's of equal importance as going to a class, going to a lab, going to a gym, whatever is normally on your schedule. Also, I don't find this personally as beneficial, but they also recommend that if you're going to schedule more than 30 minutes, it doesn't all have to be at the same session. So if you have 30 minutes in the morning, and then later in the afternoon you have 30 minutes, to just basically use your time as efficiently as possible. And then to map specific sections of a text to the time that or tasks to the time that you've got already mapped out on your calendar. I used to not think that this stuff really made a difference. I used to just think like, well, I'm pre-tenure, I have to write all the time. But then you walk around with this feeling of never doing enough. And I know a lot of grad students that I work with have this kind of, if you go have coffee with a friend or you go to a movie, you're feeling guilty because you're not doing your work. So, okay. So, one of the ways of inserting a kind of reasonable expectation for yourself and balance in your life is to basically say, I'm going to work for an hour on this thing each day, and I did it, and that means I can go enjoy my other time. So daily writing, for some people, if you have a lot of open time, a lot of our full-time doctoral students, we don't have labs generally in the education, so they're doing their courses, they're doing their own research, and they might be doing an assistantship no more than 20 hours a week generally. So they have a lot of so-called unscheduled time. But we know that just living life takes time. So even if you do have a lot of unscheduled time, it can be very beneficial to schedule it. For many people, our brains are working particularly creatively, either before bed or when we wake up. So some writing experts recommend, if you can, I have a dog, so this doesn't work for me, to sit down and write as soon as you get up. I would not be allowed to get away with that. But whenever you personally feel like you have, it's a good creative time. For some people, it might be 2 a.m. I mean, that wouldn't work for me, or unless I have insomnia, and then that can be a really good time. So when your brain is working its best, I tend to be a morning writer, but of course, on a deadline, all of those kinds of labels go out the window. You get the work done, right? When you have 10 to 20 minutes free, this is a classic time when we think, I don't have time, I can't get anything done in 10 to 15, 20 minutes. And there, we might go on social media, we might do whatever, but that is actually a time where if you have really broken down your tasks and listed them, then you can quickly grab a task. If it's looking something up or working on references or something even deeper than that, sometimes you can actually really make progress on this. And this is also a good time to be free writing. So even once you've started a text that might be more formally laid out, if you have that amount of time and you're kind of like, I don't really have time to get into it, even going to where you left off and just free writing from that point can help you with kind of the very prototypical draft. Unfortunately, we often have to sacrifice a certain amount of entertainment time. In grad school, if you're going into academia, it's also true. My view is basically to reduce the stress of the anxiety from not getting things done, I'm more willing to make those sacrifices. Obviously, everybody has their own set of things. I also really strongly believe that students, everybody, including graduate students, should get sleep and should get exercise. So it may seem hard to get all those things done. Okay, the next thing I'd like us to do is a free write. So this is longer than the quick write you did. For 4 minutes, I'd like you to write about whatever text it is you're working on now, and you may be working on multiples, so you can just choose one. Write about what it is, how far along you are, who's the audience, what is the genre. Genre is just a fancy literary term coming from the French word for type. So what type of text is it? Is it a lab report? Is it a review? Is it whatever it might be, a paper for a course? And then also, how important is this text for you in terms of your immediate work or more long-term? So this is a lot of questions to answer in 4 minutes, so you don't have to have brilliant, complete thoughts, just write whatever you write. Okay, time to get started. Okay, that's 4 minutes. Now, this time, instead of talking about this with somebody, I'd like you to try out another tool, which is concept mapping. You probably have had some experience with this. This is creating some sort of graphic representation of your ideas. Whether you're taking ideas from free writing or notes or data analysis or whatever, turning it into some kind of graphic representation. And the benefits of this are to show you where ideas might go together, especially if you're doing some sort of creative stage of writing, like free writing or brainstorming, where the ideas don't necessarily come out in any kind of logical or linear order. It also shows you where you might have ideas that are kind of hanging out there by themselves that may or may not need to go into the text, or you may need to build some kind of bridges to make them fit. And it can also help you identify where you might need more information. So I don't know if people have tools for this. Paper, there are programs online for doing mind maps or concept maps. If enough people have paper or that kind of tool, then we can do this a little bit at least and have some examples. I was gonna say, next time I do this, I'll bring paper. The old technology,
Thought of pens, but not paper.
yeah.
I
Oh,
have paper if
wow.
anyone needs
Does anybody want paper for this task? Thank you. Great. Anyone else? All right.
Yeah, I have a lot of paper if anyone needs it.
Thank you. So I'm curious about what kinds of forms your graphic visualizations are taking, what kind of shapes or approaches. Does anybody want to just hold up your image briefly? There's no right or wrong here. We can't read the words, so it's just looking at the picture. Can you describe it a little bit? I can't see it from
I
here.
have like two circles where I started my topic, and then I branched off to show what the audience was, and then I put a question why, and those are two things that I didn't fill in my short writing.
Great, okay.
So we have a circle with different branches.
Oh,
So it's
that's
like a workflow chart type of, yeah.
okay. Cool, okay, great.
So basically, it's a circle represents topics, and then the square represents different entities. So the first one, the arrow represents like a direction. It's a one-way direction, so they can't talk back to me. That's why it's a one-way.
Okay,
So one of them says explain, so it explains what the topic is about it, and the other one says layout and methodologies, and this will be more extensive if I keep.
right, great, okay, excellent. Any other formats or forms? What do you have?
It's like a tree.
A tree?
Lots
Mhm.
of branches,
Yeah.
shows the process.
Great,
We have
okay.
a tree with branches, and it's showing processes.
Anyone use a different kind of format or form for theirs? Yes, please.
More kind of a flow chart,
Mhm.
start and end point with few steps in between and bullets, just
Mhm.
what went first, what that's specific.
Another approach is using a flowchart type of representation, using bullets and a hierarchy structure.
That's great, and that actually takes us exactly to talking about outlining, because in outlining, we are turning what might be a more, I won't say chaotic, but a more lateral kind of way of looking at ideas in relationship to each other, turning it into a kind of linear sequence, which is basically how academic writing tends to work. Although in many fields in STEM, there's a lot of information is included in the graphics that are included in a publication, so it's not 100% text. But there's still this kind of notion of a linear order, that one idea connects to another. So that requires determining what is your hierarchy, right? How are the ideas going to go together? But as you draft an outline, you don't have to necessarily know that stuff in advance. There's definitely a way that the process itself can help you figure that out. And again, sometimes it can help you figure out where you might need more information or where something doesn't fit in with the rest of it. I'm a kind of an outline dictator in my teaching and in my PhD advising, because I think writing outlines can save you a huge amount of time and stress. Rather than going from notes or, ideas straight onto the page, an outline can be a good stage to really step back and say, what are my bigger ideas here? What are my main arguments in this text? What is the information I need to include in those different sections? It can also be a good way to help you break up the writing of a longer text, because you can work on sections of an outline at one time rather than just working on the paper. Also, sections of an outline usually have some kind of heading, and those can often transform into the subheadings in a particular document. When you're writing an outline, it's good to avoid writing complete sentences and definitely not writing paragraphs, because that very easily slides into writing drafts. And when you write drafts, it's really easy to get kind of off target and move on to, you may be getting to good ideas, but they may not be what your text is actually about. So outlines are another way to kind of keep you in the lane that you're working in. Also, in outlining, like with free writing, you shouldn't worry too much about the wordsmithing or typos or errors, that kind of thing. And I actually have students kind of do a show and tell of their outlines to appear either in the class or at our writing consulting services, because talking about an outline is another way of rehearsing the ideas that you're going to put into the final text. All of those things, and talking about what you're writing is a very powerful idea in practice. All of this kind of what's broadly called pre-writing, all of these different techniques, the more you're immersed in the process of writing a text, the more you're thinking about it and talking about it, the easier it's going to be to actually write that text, because you're going to feel more comfortable with the ideas, you're going to have more ownership over them. And I just anticipated this one, talking about ideas. What are some of the genres that you guys identified in this recent free write? What are the different kinds of texts that people are working on? What are you writing? What did you talk about that you're writing? Anybody writing sorry, go ahead. A journal paper?
Journal
Okay.
paper?
Good. Paper for an academic journal. Okay. What else are people working on?
A thesis paper?
Thesis paper?
Thesis?
Okay. Tutorial? What does that look like? Oh, writing a tutorial for others. Okay, so that's kind of like a teaching document? Yeah, great, all right. Other genres? That's it? Those are the major ones that people are doing? Okay. what I was hoping we could do, actually, I think we're kind of running out of time here, was to have you talk about your genre with other people working in that genre. Because one of the things that really helps with learning, with doing a new kind of writing or learning a new genre is asking questions about it, learning about it from people who have done it before, reading samples of it. Because one of the things that's important to understand about genres is that each genre has its own purpose, audience, and format. And so, like, writing a tutorial has a different purpose, a different audience, a different format than writing a thesis, writing a journal article. There's a lot of interchangeability across them, but when they all get put together, they're quite different. All right, let's go past this. Okay.
I
Sorry.
have a question.
Yeah.
Are we holding questions to the
No,
end?
no,
or-
feel free.
Yeah, so, I was just wondering, if we look for an editor, how do you go about finding an editor or, I guess, a proofreader for our texts? Where do we find that type of resource? Because as graduate students, I know the Writing Center is typically for undergrad students and English tutoring, but they don't seem to have the experience to working with with graduate students
Right.
that are writing theses and that sort of thing. So where can we find editors?
Do you have an answer related to RIT for
So
that?
I have some answer, but
Okay.
not a lot.
All right.
So our Writing Center does have a couple of people there that are trained to work with graduate students, but you definitely want to specify that you're a graduate student when you're making an appointment so that they put you with one of their faculty or graduate student writers. Because you're right that most of the people at the Writing Center are not prepared to help a graduate student. However, they aren't going to edit, they're more
Yeah.
helping you in process.
Right. If you're looking for someone to kind of edit or proofread or working at the end stages of an important genre, like a thesis, not probably so much a paper for a course, on our writing support services, we have a list under our resources of freelancers, people that are, we don't give them any kinds of tests or anything, but we do look at their CVs, and we have maybe 8 or 10 people.
I have used those editors
you?
with my students
Okay.
many times,
Great.
and I send them to your webpage.
Okay, good.
So I can actually say, and they've had great success with the
Oh,
editors
I'm really glad
on
to
your
hear that.
webpage.
Okay.
Yes.
And there are even people on there who work as dissertation coaches who will help people throughout the whole process. So,
I wasn't sure if I was allowed to share that with you in the room, because I wasn't
Yes.
sure if you were
No,
sharing your
I mean,
editors with RIT.
it's really just, I mean, it's just a public service. I don't guarantee their work. I don't even know what they charge. It's just, if they look like they've got a reasonable amount of information, then we'll put them up
They're
there.
actually very
Okay.
competitive,
Okay.
because I have had a lot of students work with those
Great.
editors, and a couple of them I know.
Okay.
And they are very competitive,
Great.
and most of them are local.
Yeah, they're local.
Which
a
is
lot of them.
great,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
compared to the online editors that you sometimes get, these
okay.
people are amazing to work with.
Well, I'm really glad to
Yeah.
hear that. Okay, good. In terms of like figuring out who's good to work with, I think some of it's just trial and error, is maybe having somebody work on a shorter text and then see how you like what they've done and then decide if you want them to work on a longer text. Kind of touching back to the whole approach to free writing or quick writing, there's a writer named Anne Lamott who talks about writing a crappy first draft. And she's actually not the only person. I think Peter Elbow talked about this as well. This might be the free writing draft, or it might be the next draft after the free writing draft. But it's the same general idea that you put anything down on the paper. It's easier to revise than to write. And you don't worry about grammar, mechanics, you don't worry about the logic of your ideas, you don't even worry about if you have evidence or citations, that you're just basically getting it out there. One scholar, I don't know if he's still alive, he was a sociologist named Howard Becker, who's written about writing for graduate students. He recommended, and I've done this unintentionally, trying to write without your stuff. So without your computer, without your data, without your sources. One time I was organizing a faculty writing retreat for my department, at Writers and Books on University Avenue. And I was biking down there and I had everything I needed and I got there and I didn't have my laptop. And I was like, okay, it would take me 10 minutes to bike home, 10 minutes to bike back. I'm going to lose a half an hour out of 3 hours. But I had a tablet, like a legal tablet. I had some notes and I had a lot in my brain. I don't even know what I was working on now. That was a long time ago. But Becker's point is basically there's a lot more in your brain about your paper, whatever it is, than oftentimes we're willing to believe. We often really rely on all these other things. But if you have a short amount of time, this can be another way of just sit down, bang out this crappy first draft, and you have something. And you can see now from writing in 2 minutes, 4 minutes, how quickly you can actually write things that make sense. You might not want to publicize them or publish them, but you can start to work with them. Revising, as I mentioned before, is a very, very important tool for almost anything. And you can schedule revising time into your writing time. So there's nothing that says revising doesn't count as writing. You also may want to schedule time to work on different aspects of the same text. It's very hard to proofread at the same time that you're going deep into your arguments or structure of your text. So, it's good to, or checking references if you're not using a citation management program. It's good to focus on kind of larger structural issues first, the argument, how you're laying out the paper, and then worry about wordsmithing, and then later worry about proofreading and editing and checking citations. This is not my computer, but I could show you, some of the entries in this book, we had 25 drafts of them. These are 750 words each. Some of that was because we were working as a group, but not all. Most of it was because it just took that long to kind of get it to where we thought it was good enough. Papers that I've published in academic journals, often 10, 12, 15, 20 drafts. What is a draft is a kind of existential question. So, but I tend to save a new version of a document every few days so that I'm not risking losing, even though supposedly it's being backed up, I'm not risking losing a whole bunch of work. So some people will save a new draft every day. Some people, so that, my 15 drafts might be somebody else's 7 drafts. But the point is, it's a lot of drafts. Okay. We are very close to the end. Okay. Another tool is staying focused, which we've talked about, using Pomodoro, turning off email, turning off notifications on your devices, and putting yourself in an environment away from distractions. And I mentioned earlier about the writing group we have on Friday mornings. Any kind of accountability measure that you can set up to help you make progress. Obviously, if you have assignments due, that's a type of accountability measure, but that's only at the end. So whether you have a partner, when I was writing my dissertation, I checked in on Monday morning by email with a friend. We set goals for the week, and then we met on Friday afternoons to see where we were. She's probably the only person who read my whole dissertation word by word, I'm pretty sure. Her son is now at the Eastman School, so that was 20 plus years ago. Writing partners, it could be as simple as being in the same place at the same time, but it could also be talking about your ideas with somebody else. It doesn't always have to be somebody who is in exactly your same area. It can be somebody kind of adjacent. Deadlines, I'm a big believer in deadlines. We don't always make them, but if we don't have them, we definitely won't make them. So, it's whether you're setting them with your advisor or yourself or your accountability partner. I don't tend to do this so much, but there are people who find it very productive to have reward or penalty systems. So whether it's, if I do one Pomodoro, I'm going to give myself a piece of chocolate, or, I don't know if you guys have heard of this, but there's this thing where if you miss your deadline, if it's a big deadline, you send money to an organization you hate. So, you like sign an agreement. There's actually, I think, websites online where you basically put the money in escrow. So, it depends how much motivation you need. That would be pretty motivating for me if I had to do that. Okay. That's it. So writers write and writers write. So the best way to become a better writer is to do more writing.